The letter came on a Monday. It was taped to the front door, bold red ink bleeding across the HOA's logo like a warning shot. Violation of Article 7B, unauthorized front yard alteration. Elena held it with trembling fingers. They're talking about my garden. Her voice was quiet, disbelieving. I took the paper and read it again. The accusation was absurd. She hadn't installed a fountain or fencing, just a modest patch of butterfly-attracting flowers beside our walkway. Milkweed, lavender, coneflowers, and a small rose bush. She babbied like it breathed. We'd moved to Clearwater Hills for peace. After 20 years in the SEALs, tours in Fallujah, Kandahar, Mogadishu, I had traded combat boots for yard gloves. Elena, my anchor through it all, finally had space to grow something living. We weren't rich, but we paid cash for the house. No mortgage. No nonsense. Or so I thought. That letter proved otherwise. I stepped outside and scanned the street. Identical homes, manicured lawns, and watchful eyes behind curtains. A community curated like a military formation, uniform and tense. You didn't do anything wrong, I said, crumpling the letter. Elena's eyes lingered on the garden. It makes me feel whole again, like there's color in the world. I kissed her forehead. Then it stays. That afternoon, I left for a routine VA checkup in Tampa. It wasn't until I pulled into the driveway 4 hours later that I sensed something was wrong. The garden was destroyed, torn stems, flattened soil, roots exposed like nerves. Then I saw Elena on the porch, curled into herself, arms wrapped tightly, one cheek bruised violet. Her eyes were dry, but her silence was louder than any scream. I dropped my keys and ran to her. What happened? They came while you were gone, she whispered. Who? The HOA enforcers. Her voice cracked. 3 of them. They didn't knock. They just walked up and started yanking plants. I begged them to stop. One of them, he shoved me. She looked down at her scraped palms. I fell into the walkway. They laughed. My jaw tightened. I forced myself to breathe slowly, deliberately. 20 years of training kept me from sprinting down the street. Instead, I opened the door, turned on our home security system, and pulled the footage. There they were, 3 men in matching HOA polos, clipboards in hand like they owned the place. They walked straight into our yard without hesitation, trampling over the soil like soldiers storming enemy ground. Elena emerged moments later, speaking calmly, palms up. The tallest one barked something we couldn't hear. She stepped back, gesturing to the plants. That's when it happened. He shoved her with both hands. She stumbled backward and hit the brick pavers with a sickening thud. One of them laughed. Another grabbed the rose bush and tossed it into a bin like garbage. I watched the footage again, then a third time. My pulse slowed. My mind sharpened. This wasn't a mistake. This was a message. A deliberate show of power. That night, I stood in the darkened kitchen, Elena asleep on the couch behind me. I replayed their faces in my mind, memorizing posture, stance, and movement. Civilians saw uniforms. I saw weaknesses. They thought they were dealing with a quiet old vet and his flower-loving wife. They had no idea who I really was. In Kandahar, we used to say, it only takes one mistake to wake a sleeping lion. They made theirs today. And I was wide awake. The next morning, I shaved with military precision, laced up a pair of boots I hadn't worn in years, and stepped outside into the sunlit quiet of Clearwater Hills. A place that pretended to be peaceful until you looked beneath the surface. Elena stayed home, still shaken but determined to replant. She had bruises, yes, but she wore them like armor now. I could see it in her posture. Hurt, but unbroken. I wasn't going to the police, not yet. First, I needed to know what I was dealing with. At precisely 10 a.m., the Clearwater Hills HOA held its bi-weekly meeting at the clubhouse, an overglorified community center with stale coffee and faux leather chairs. I entered quietly and took a seat in the back, arms crossed. At the front of the room stood Carl Dunning, HOA president, former real estate lawyer. Balding, with a clipped tone and a smug expression that told you he'd never been punched in the mouth. He spoke with the authority of someone who believed in his own rules more than the Constitution. Enforcement must be swift and consistent, Carl said, tapping a folder of printed violations. If we let one yard go rogue, the whole community suffers. The room nodded, a few muttering agreements. No one mentioned the garden. No one mentioned the assault. That was when I understood. Fear ruled this place. Fear of fines, of retaliation, of social exile. Carl didn't lead. He dictated. And the rest followed to avoid the spotlight. When the meeting ended, I approached him. "Mr. Dunning," I said, extending a hand. "Jack Sawyer." He took it, reluctantly. "New homeowner?" "Retired Navy SEAL," I said. "And yes, recently moved in with my wife." Recognition flickered in his eyes, but he masked it with a politician's smile. "Ah, yes. The garden situation. You'll find our bylaws are quite clear." "She was assaulted," I interrupted. "On our property. I have it on camera." He raised a brow. "She interfered with a compliance action. She was shoved to the ground." "That's your interpretation," he replied coolly. "Our enforcers followed HOA protocol." "You should know," I said, voice low. "There are laws stronger than your protocol. Touching someone without consent? That's called battery." He smirked. "Then file a report. Hire a lawyer. But you'll find the bylaws are airtight." That was his mistake, assuming I'd play by his rules. By noon, I had my own mission: dismantle the empire Carl had built brick by brick. Step 1. Intel. I began visiting neighbors under the guise of casual conversation. Many were hesitant, nervous glances, hushed tones, but the stories came out in pieces. A retired firefighter fined for having a flag slightly crooked. A widowed teacher cited for unapproved door paint. A disabled Marine threatened with eviction for installing a ramp without prior permission. All of it enforced by Carl's hand-picked security volunteers. They weren't police. They weren't licensed. But they acted like enforcers in a bad movie. By the third day, I had enough. Step 2. Build allies. I contacted every veteran in the neighborhood. We met in garages and back patios, away from HOA eyes. Marines, Air Force techs, Army grunts. We shared a common thread. We'd bled for a country that respected freedom, not fear. We formed what we jokingly called the Task Force Front Yard. But our purpose was serious. We gathered evidence. Photos. Letters. Screenshots of fines and threats. Elena's footage. We started compiling everything. Still, I knew it wouldn't be enough to take Carl down with paper alone. I needed leverage. So I dug deeper. Carl's cousin ran Clearwater Landscaping, the only contractor the HOA allowed for yard maintenance. Nepotism disguised as policy. Then there was the treasurer, whose company had been cited twice for financial discrepancies. One of the HOA enforcers, a man named Brian, he had a record. Burglary, sealed after a plea deal. And now he was trespassing on people's lawns like a deputy? They had built their castle on sand. I was preparing to knock the whole thing down. That night, Elena and I sat together, her fingers brushing against mine as we watched the footage again. She no longer winced. She leaned forward, studying. "You're really doing this?" she asked. "They declared war on the wrong garden." She smiled faintly. "Then I want to help." "Tomorrow," I said. "Tomorrow, we start hitting back." Outside, the wind shifted. The air tasted different. Something was coming. I never believed in brute retaliation. Not outside the battlefield. But justice? Justice was sacred. By sunrise, I had posted the footage online. I didn't say a word. I let the video speak for itself. 3 HOA enforcers trespassing, destroying property, and one of them physically shoving my wife to the ground. I kept it unlisted, then sent the link anonymously to every homeowner in Clearwater Hills. Then I waited. By lunchtime, the video had made its rounds. The HOA forum lit up like a brush fire. Some tried to dismiss it, claiming context was missing. Others, braver ones, demanded answers. An emergency HOA meeting was called for that evening. Carl was about to realize his grip was slipping. But he wasn't the type to bow quietly. Around 3 p.m., a black SUV idled outside our home. I was repairing the broken garden bed when the door opened and 2 men stepped out. Not the same ones from before. These were cleaner cut, dressed like private security. But I recognized the posture. Intimidation. The taller one spoke first. "You Jack Sawyer?" "Depends who's asking," I said, not looking up. "We're here on behalf of the Clearwater Hills Homeowners Association. You're being asked to remove your online content and cease unauthorized meetings with residents." I stood slowly. "This isn't a battlefield. This is my lawn. You're in violation of—" I cut him off. "Step 1 inch closer and I promise you'll regret it." They hesitated. They weren't expecting steel in my voice. "This isn't Afghanistan," I said, stepping forward. "But I assure you, I've ended threats in worse places than this HOA. And unlike you, I don't need permission to defend my home." The taller one glanced at his partner. "You threatening us?"
No.
"I'm advising you to leave before you test what retired really means." They left without another word. Elena watched from the window, her face pale but steady. She knew I was walking a tightrope, but we both understood something now. The HOA wasn't a group of neighbors anymore. It was a regime. And regimes fall hardest when their masks crack. That night, the emergency meeting was packed. Standing room only. Neighbors who'd once been silent now buzzed with tension. I stood in the back again, letting the pressure build. Carl took the podium like a king defending a crumbling castle. "There's been a lot of misinformation," he began. "Mischaracterizations designed to disrupt our order. The video circulating was selectively edited." I stepped forward. "Then, let's watch the full version." Gasps rippled through the crowd as I connected my laptop to the projector. Elena stood beside me, chin high, eyes locked forward. The room went quiet as the footage played from the beginning. This time, with sound. Every shout. Every protest. Every cruel laugh. The shove. When it ended, the silence was crushing. Carl cleared his throat. This is taken out of context." She was warned. "You're watching a felony, Carl," I said. "Assault.
Trespassing.
Destruction of property. All orchestrated by you." A woman stood from the crowd, Ms. Hammond, a widow who once confided in me. "They threatened to fine me $300 for planting tomatoes." More voices joined. "They broke into my yard without notice. They told me I couldn't fly the POW MIA flag. My son's wheelchair ramp. A violation of aesthetic continuity." That's what they said. One by one, voices turned into a wave. Years of suppressed grievances, all boiling over. Carl's composure cracked. "This is all hearsay," he shouted. "None of you understand the responsibility of maintaining standards." "I do," I replied. "I've commanded platoons under live fire. And I can tell you this. Real leadership doesn't hide behind policies. It listens. It protects." I handed a stack of printed files to the treasurer. "Here are the bylaws you've broken. The nepotism. The financial funneling. The unauthorized use of private contractors. And my wife's lawyer? She's already filing charges." Carl stammered, red-faced. "You think you've won?" "No," I said. "I think Clearwater Hills has finally woken up." The room erupted into applause, not cheers of victory, but of release. Outside, as we walked to the truck, Elena squeezed my hand. "You didn't go to war today," she whispered. "You brought peace." I nodded. "But it's not over yet." And I meant it, because takedowns were never just one night. They were operations. And I had one final move left. The next 48 hours moved like a coordinated strike. The HOA board had been rocked. Carl, shaken and cornered, skipped the following morning's community walkthrough, his usual parade of power. Instead, a notice appeared on the forum. Temporary suspension of HOA activities pending legal review. That was my opening. I filed formal complaints with the county. Elena's assault report went straight to the sheriff's office, accompanied by video evidence. Her lawyer filed civil charges against the enforcers, citing bodily harm, trespass, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We also contacted the Department of Housing, initiating a formal investigation into the HOA's discriminatory enforcement practices. And I didn't stop there. The neighborhood's veterans, my task force front yard, helped me draft an open letter calling for a vote of no confidence in the HOA board. We printed it, signed it, and hand-delivered it to every doorstep. The response was overwhelming. Within a week, we'd secured the required votes. A special election was scheduled. But Carl wasn't going to go quietly. He rallied what little support he had left, those who feared change more than corruption. On the day of the vote, he tried to discredit me in front of the crowd gathered at the clubhouse. He's just a thug with combat training, Carl spat. He thinks discipline means violence. He doesn't understand how communities work. I stepped up calmly. You're right, I do understand discipline. But I also understand service. And this isn't a community. Not under you. It's a fiefdom. That ends today. I turned to the neighbors. You deserve a board that listens. That serves. That doesn't weaponize bylaws or send enforcers after gardeners. A beat of silence. Then a slow, rising applause. The vote was counted in under an hour. Carl was removed. So were 3 of his board members. The rest resigned before they could be questioned. We didn't celebrate with champagne. We celebrated by rolling up our sleeves. In the following weeks, we drafted a new charter, transparent, inclusive, fair. We abolished the enforcer program and established a volunteer-based neighborhood council with term limits and public audits. We opened monthly town halls, where voices mattered more than titles. Elena, once bruised and shaken, was voted head of the new beautification committee. Her garden became the symbol of change. What they tried to stomp out now stood stronger, greener, and prouder than before, bursting with tomatoes, basil, and yellow sunflowers that followed the light. One afternoon, while I installed a new flagpole out front, a black SUV pulled up again. But this time, it wasn't intimidation. It was Brian, the enforcer who'd shoved Elena. He stepped out slowly, no swagger now. No badge, no clipboard. Just a man in jeans and a ball cap, clutching a folder. I came to apologize, he said. I quit.
I didn't know she was hurt that bad.
I didn't sign up for that. I studied him, reading posture, breathing, standard threat assessment. But all I saw was shame. She forgives you, I said, after a long pause. But I don't speak for her. He nodded. I wrote her a letter. Thought it was the least I could do. He handed it to me, then walked away. I watched the SUV disappear down the road before turning back to the flagpole. Later, at dinner, I passed Elena the letter. She read it in silence, folded it neatly, and placed it in a drawer. Let's just plant more flowers tomorrow, she said. That night, I stood alone on the porch, watching the stars settle in the sky. The house was quiet, peaceful, the kind of peace that doesn't come from silence, but from knowing you stood your ground. Clearwater Hills wasn't perfect, but it was healing.
And as for me?
I wasn't just a retired Navy SEAL anymore. I was a husband, a neighbor, a protector. And when tyranny tried to bloom in suburbia, I reminded it why men like me never truly retire.